Perfect. So thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm excited to talk about this issue of combating online grooming. It certainly is a challenge for us. Let's see if I can get my screen sharing to move forward here. Let's see, I seem to be, okay. In the olden days, we used to use the term child pornography, then we've become enlightened and we now use the term child sexual abuse images. But when we talk about online grooming, those images, in conjunction with numerous other types of victimization, enticement, harassment, stalking, sex tourism, families who are selling their children online, all of these dynamics, as well as commercial sexual exploitation of children, are just problems that we have. And the deepest part are the existence of these sexual abuse images that we will be thinking about. When we think about online grooming, or what I refer to as ICT grooming, information and communication technology grooming, there are all different kinds of child sexual exploitation, but the ones that I have bolded are ones that entail ICT fairly often. And that would be commercial sexual exploitation of children, enticement, stalking, and sextortion, sex tourism with traveling offenders, and self-produced images after online grooming. So the online enticement reports from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children from last year to now have dramatically increased. 98% increase in online enticement reports between January and September versus the same period in 2019. They're seeing 63% increase in cyber tip reports of individuals who are trying to groom children in this manner. So this is a very timely time for us to be discussing this. And yet we have to look at history. And I always love Stonehenge. I always love the UK and England. When I want to go back to 2005, but I'll go back even further. But in a second, I want to tell you about this article that was written in the New York Times called The Making of a Molester. And it was the story of a man who was, by the time the article was written, in sex offender treatment, who was trying to explain how the presence of type on his computer from his stepdaughter, who was 3 doors down the hallway in their home, was so luring to him, and how it was much more gripping to him than actually meeting her across the breakfast table. And every time she would write something, he would begin to fantasize that she really meant more than what she was writing from bedroom to bedroom, and how he ended up attempting to molest her and ultimately went to prison. The type is really something we have not understood so well. A woman without her man is nothing, versus a woman without her man is nothing. Same words, but when you type them in and say them a certain way, they have a totally different meaning. Do you remember when we had the book, The Joy of Sex? It was a very big bestseller. And I remember when The Joy of Cyber Sex came out, and we began to understand the meaning of simple letters, like the letter M. If you had a person talking to another person and they put the letter M on their screen and then just held M down, and it would have many, many M's going across the line, to you and I, that might just look like, what's going on here? But to the recipient of cyber sex, that's a moan. That's what that means. And that kind of dynamic is very alive and well when we talk about kids who are being, and adults who are using chat as a means of grooming. From a historical perspective, the internet chat began in the nature of online communication, first started in 1997 with a site called 6 Degrees. It was shortly followed by Friendster, MySpace, and Second Life. And online chat began to become the concern for luring, whether of adult peers or children and teens, because they were not only just chatting, but there was also beginning to leak into this chat adult pornography images and child sexual abuse material woven into the content, partly as a coincidental content. So we went from MySpace to My Place, in fact. This is what 6 Degrees originally looked like. You know, it's kind of put your member login number, and then we went into MySpace, which was founded in 2003. It became the largest social networking service online from 2005 to 2009. And you know, when we think about that, we look at how the users for MySpace were beginning to notice that they were taking over Yahoo and other engagement sites. In 2006, Fox announced its plan to launch a UK version of MySpace, and it also launched its presence into 11 other countries. At a certain point, they had 90 million users. And so certainly the UK was another friend of this friend, MySpace. But we had to recognize that it wasn't necessarily a safe space. In 2009, the task force began to notice that there were registered sex offenders who were we have sex offender registration in the United States, who were in MySpace. And social networking sites all over the world began to become concerned that individuals who were registered offenders were going to have the opportunity to talk to children. So they removed 90,000 registered sex offenders in that 1 year, over a 2-year period, which was double the number of registered sex offenders from the previous year. This required additional changes to laws that not only said you cannot live within a certain distance or you cannot engage yourself with other children, but you also cannot engage online with children in that way. So there began to develop over time lots of different sex rings. And I want to call your attention to one that became very famous over several years. The nom de plume was named after Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice in Wonderland. So Charles Dodgson is who Lewis Carroll was. His real name was Charles Dodgson. He was a Protestant minister, and he was felt at the time that he was writing Alice in Wonderland to be a child pornographer. In fact, the journal Child Abuse and Neglect had an article written in 1987 regarding the fact that he was thought to be a child pornographer because in the era of his time when he was taking photographs, he was one of those early photographers, he photographed this particular child, Alice Little, a lot. He had hundreds and hundreds of photographs of her. And if you notice how she's dressed in this picture next to him kissing the very same child, that was from a Victorian perspective, very lewd, this kind of exposure for this child. And so he was felt to actually be a child pornographer. His family, of course, really spoke out against that article that came out in Child Abuse and Neglect. But it is interesting because many people took over the whole Lewis and Carroll phenomenon. So Operation Cathedral was a police operation that was looking at international child sexual abuse material called the Wonderland Club. Remember Alice in Wonderland? It was led by the British National Crime Squad, 1,500 officers, 13 other police forces around the globe, including the United States, the UK, Sweden, Germany, Italy, as they were trying to break up a lot of these rings. And I know in my early days of having to review images with law enforcement, it was very common to see the term, lots of different terms that had some terminology that had to do with Alice in Wonderland. And then we had Second Life, and Second Life became pretty front and center in the UK. I recall a BBC video about Second Life when it decided to allow the avatars in Second Life to take on a new community, and the community was that of pedophiles. I remember that it was in June of the year that they decided to open a pedophile community. So if you wanted to come in and be a pedophile, you were allowed to do that. And that caused a lot of outcry, especially in the UK. So the internet, child safety, the issues of parents, can they come in, can they not, can they try to protect their children, are there offenders in a home who are using the internet, has made it become even more challenging. So Yahoo Messenger in 2002 was one of the first reported cases in the United States of online grooming, ICT grooming that led to murder. Casey Woody was the only daughter in her family. Her mom had died of a car accident when she was 7. Her dad was in law enforcement. And when she turned 13, she was in a chat room. You know, these were early times for chat rooms with a guy named Dave, who said he was 17. He had a lot of similarities with her life story. His aunt had been hurt in a terrible car accident, was in a coma. So of course she began to relate to this person and felt, wow, he really understands what I'm going through. She was the only daughter in this family. Casey's dad found out about Dave, and he forbade conversations between the two when he found out that Dave was celebrating his 18th birthday, but she was already groomed to trust him more than she did her dad, whom she thought was old-fashioned. And that's a very common dynamic that we see, unfortunately, with respect to ICT grooming. This online chat isn't just the pictures. In fact, the pictures would be the thing that would make a child be on alert. Maybe this isn't really my friend. I go back to the secret of cyber sex and the lure of words, the chat that comes across, the abbreviations and the emoticons and all the different things that really make that seem so much more of a very intimate encounter. And so unfortunately, on the night of her death, this so-called 18-year-old Dave came to Arkansas from California, where he was actually living. Her brother was at university studying, and there was another young man living in their house who was also at school. The offender, whose name was Dave Fuller, actually came to her house and abducted this young girl. The police discovered her still live computer, and they determined who he was, and also saw that he had rented a storage unit somewhere in the town where she lived. She lived in a very small town. It was a storage unit big enough for him to back the vehicle that he had into that storage unit. And as they began to approach that storage unit, they heard a shot, and it was Fuller committing suicide. He had already drugged and raped this child before he shot her in the head. And then when the police located him, he killed himself. So I want to let you know that when we talked about missing persons cases at the National Center for Missing Exploited Children, with whom I've worked for several years, I felt that the field did not have up-to-date information on missing person cases since the internet. And particularly because of information and communication technology alluring and that sort of thing. So we wrote, some colleagues and I got together and wrote a book recently called Perspectives on Missing Persons Cases. And in it, as I have done in other textbooks that I've written, I have tried to include experiential chapters. And in this particular book are 2 experiential chapters of parents whose children were abducted. Both of these children were internet and communication technology lured children. So there's a lot that we learned about what happens when that's the case. One of the things that we found is that when a child leaves her home to meet someone, or the child is seen as the offender. The child is seen as not having been smart enough to have made a better choice. And so from a family perspective, they're not seen as the kind of family that has a missing child. They are seen as a family who wasn't a good family. Why didn't you take care of your child better? Why didn't you teach her what to do? And then we also found out that if these children were found alive and rescued, they became the, oh my gosh, the victims of a maelstrom of lots of negative information from individuals who blamed the victim. They take victim blaming to a higher level. In addition, we learned that sometimes the investigation can do even more harm than good, because if victims are rescued and don't recall everything that happened, then sometimes investigators will show them the chat logs, the information that they had said, which can make the victim feel much more responsible for what happened to them. And it's even worse if they show the victim images of their own victimization. All of these are within the context of trying to conduct an investigation, even though most of the time, if a victim has been found, the offender has also been found. So let's hear from now an adult victim who had been groomed online as a 13-year-old from a person who posed as a 17-year-old and who had an older friend who was really cool, and that older friend came to meet her at her home on New Year's night. And as she walked down the walkway of her home to meet this person in a car, he abducted her and took her 4 states away, where he sexually assaulted her, tortured her, raped her for 4 days straight, live streaming. Now I want you to hear from her.
At some time between my recovery and the trial, the FBI came to my house and they said, we need to show you something. And we need you to identify yourself in it. And I didn't put 2 and 2 together and think that I was going to have to see what they were going to show me. And they told me that my parents had to leave because if they showed it to them, they would be in trouble. So they sat me down and they opened the computer and they had me watch just a few seconds of a video, and it felt like a lifetime. In this video, my hands are bound above my head. I'm bruised, I'm crying, and I'm being beaten. To be abused is one thing. To experience the pain, it's yours. To see it through somebody else's eyes, it becomes somebody else's. It's shared in a way that other people found pleasurable. And also, now, in my memories, they were my memories, and I created them as I could handle the trauma. But now I have a very concrete image of what happened. I can see it. It's not, in memories, typically you don't see yourself like a dream. You see it through your eyes, or it's an emotion, or a feeling, or a smell, or something that's sensory. Purely sensory, but to see it so concretely, it was damaging. It was extremely damaging.
I think we have a better understanding of how the mirror neurons in our brain, research that was done in Italy now many years ago, that lets us understand that what we see, we are experiencing very often, and multiple parts of our brain are lighting up when we look at things. And so for this victim to have to look at images of her own torture, you can imagine how detrimental that is to her, and really begs for the risk of causing her to develop a dissociative disorder. We, over the years, have had wonderful researchers to help us understand a little bit more about these kinds of offenders and collectors. And what we know from David Finkelhor and his research is that when we have child sexual abuse material involved in the case versus a child sexual abuse case where a child has made a disclosure, the more successful litigation will be when there's the presence of material, which basically says if there's material, it's 95%, 80% when a child has made a disclosure. And so what that says is that we're more likely to believe pictures of a child being sexually abused than what the child is actually saying to us. We also didn't have a good understanding about how to handle multi-offender cases. I often speak about the fact that when we have abusive image cases, we don't have a one-on-one case necessarily. We may have more advanced training when we have multiple child victims in one offender, but when we talk about these kinds of cases, these are multi-offender cases, like Hyena, around one victim whose images continue to be traded and shared. And that's why in the United States, anyone who's downloading, trading, and possessing images of a known victim and who is arrested is going to have to pay restitution to that victim because of that. ICT technology was spoken about in the paper Violence in Cyberspace, which was part of the United Nations Studies on Violence Against Children in 2005. And it's still a very good document. I would encourage you to download it because it does give a good explanation from an international perspective on all the different ways in which children can be harmed. Dr. Richard Estes from the University of Pennsylvania in the United States gave us the term CSEC, commercial sexual exploitation of children. And boy, there is hardly any other form of abuse that is more facilitated by online grooming than CSEC cases. We know that children are rarely on street corners anymore. They are being told by the traffickers where to go and how much money they're supposed to receive. And if they don't meet their quota, what will happen to them. Our Internet Crimes Against Children's task forces have helped us to understand that these types of offenders are diverse. They're not like the people we thought, not the stereotypes. This is a guy by the name of Jacarius Ford. I testified in his sex trafficking case. He was a very high-end kind of guy who was providing minors and adult women to celebrities in Hollywood. And it was very interesting to be there at his trial and to testify against him and to educate the jury and the judges regarding the fact that these are compliant victims. Sometimes they're doing this because they have no other choice because of the amount of abuse that they experience. Sexting and the typology of sexting that was given to us in 2011 by Finkelhor and Janet Swolak is still very relevant, and I speak of it often. When youth produce their own images, it's either because it's an experiment, because they have a romantic interest in someone, or they're sexually attention seeking. But if those images are aggravated brought on by a youth, for example, there is a high risk for an intent to harm that youth, or they're distributed recklessly. If it's by an adult, then we are going to be even more concerned about the issue of self-generated images. And it's part of how we have to rehabilitate these victims so that they are not seen as the offenders. It was Ter de Zam in the Netherlands who gave us the whole issue of one of the newer forms of really terrible internet crimes against children, and that is what I refer to as pay-for-view images, where children are being sold, typically in the Philippines, to adults who are in other countries, especially the United States, who are calling the shots across their laptop computers, telling the trafficker on the other end exactly what they want the children to do. And this is a terrible form of exploitation, and the report on this that is out now, came out last year, is available online. It's entitled Online Exploitation of Children, which is a very generalized term, but it is in part funded by the International Justice Mission, the United States State Department, and the Philippine Embassy. So please do download that report. It will give you a lot of information. When I went to the Philippines, I was in the airport, and this was one of the signs that I saw in the airport. I was very impressed. Turn a child sex tourist into an ex-tourist. I was really happy to see that they are mindful of what is going on. We also have this concept of child sex rings, multiple individuals who are grooming children online, almost within a set script. There are online grooming guides. There have been investigations that I've worked in where when they found the offender in his or her home or on their computer were 25, 85, 120-page documents that were called online grooming guides, helping the offender to learn exactly how to groom the family, how to infiltrate into a youth-serving organization so people would trust you, what to do, how to convince a child that the sexual nuances that you are beginning to show to them is all in fun, or it's what people do when they love each other and you're so special to me. It's very compelling to know about this. The other part of child sex rings, and some of the bigger ones included the one that was Kitty Pics and Kitty Vids, are international child sex rings where individuals are sharing images only within their ring. One big ring that was broken in the United States involved several offenders who changed their screen names on the same day, on the same theme, and were trading images only between themselves. And when I testified in that particular case, what struck me was that the leader of the ring had a 7-figure income, and the security person of the ring was a former KGB agent. So you can imagine how
meeting a teen girl online is actually pretty easy. You can go into any chat room and just start talking. Most of the girls are usually so insecure and desperate for
attention from older guys is totally flattering. They're so much more mature and understanding than the guys my age.
Age actually works to my advantage. They like to brag to their friends that they're dating an older guy, so I just play along and pretend I'm really
interested in the same things I am. You can talk forever and really get to know someone without worrying about looks or whatever. That's the best thing about
chatting. Seems unthreatening to them, so they lower their guard. After a while, I start talking about how we're soulmates and how lucky we are to have found each other.
Other people don't understand. I know what I'm doing.
You know, now, when we think about cyber enticement, we also have to think about cyber stalking, and the similar dynamics are present. I think that was the case with respect to the very well-known child, Brett Bednar, whose mother spoke previously in the Marie Collins Foundation conference. This is a dynamic that we have to recognize. Just like with Casey Woody, you can have it can be exceedingly dangerous. Then there is sextortion, which also entails many times online communication and internet sometimes if you will, blackmail. Sometimes the individual knows the individual who has implanted spyware on their computer and now is telling them that they have to provide images, and if they don't, it won't be okay. Or it could be an unknown person in these sextortion cases. Here's another public service announcement about it based upon a real international case.
I wish you went to my school or lived closer so we could finally meet.
Take it out. Dinner in an hour. Don't spend too long on the phone.
Okay, I know you've been waiting for this for a while, so I wanted to give you something special. Is this okay? Why are you doing this?
So this was a very important case because this particular survivor was extorted for almost 2 years by this particular offender. And it took a lot to be able to find him. He was in the Netherlands. He had over 300 victims. She was one of the few survivors whose actual picture was on the cover of a major magazine in the United States, which I remember when I saw that, I was worried about re-exploiting an exploited victim. But the FBI and this victim, who was by this time now 20, said that she wanted to go along with that process so that the other victims who did not know that this offender had finally been caught would at least not be afraid as much as they had been, because he was simultaneously demanding images from 300 victims. It was really an incredible case, and I recall having attended several meetings in different countries that talked about this particular offender and survivors from their own countries. So the sextortion component of it is quite a really dynamic that we are just starting to talk about, and our poor mental health care providers really are not going to be so knowledgeable on what we do. So, you know, when we think about the fact that the majority of abusive images are made by family members before they ever get onto the internet, the role of ICT grooming can then be really grooming the buyers, grooming the consumers, grooming the people that they've met online who have a sexual interest in children. And so in order to trade, they're willing to do this. We know that these images are also sometimes part of other types of grooming and networking behavior, such as a dad in our state who was dialoguing with another person and then went to meet him at a hotel with his 5-year-old adopted son, as well as with his camera, ropes, and lubricants. And fortunately, the person he was dialoguing with was an undercover agent. But that grooming dynamic isn't just the grooming of children. Sometimes it's the grooming of other individuals who have like-minded thoughts, who may never have acted, but now have an opportunity to do so. So when we think about families who produce these images, Very often, sexual abuse and exploitation is not the only kind of victimization these children experience. Very often, they're psychologically maltreated, they are typically neglected, they're kept away from other people so that they would not likely make a disclosure. And so they often fall into the category of what we refer to as polyvictimization, meaning that they experience at least 4 types of child abuse and or neglect per year. If you have a child who is a poly victim, and this is frequently the case, then what the National Child Trauma Stress Network helps us understand is that as they grow up, the degree of trauma that they experience is profound, and they are more likely than children who have not had polyvictimization as a precursor. They are more likely to have complex PTSD. This is very relevant because if you are a mental health care provider and you don't have this knowledge, you need to go back, first of all, if you're seeing this victim now as an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old or 22-year-old, and use the adverse childhood experiences screen to get a better feel for, were you a poly victim? The Adverse Childhood Experiences screen, you can download at any time. It's internationally recognized, and it's 10 questions that look at victimization of children and then family dysfunction. And having the use of the Adverse Childhood Experiences questionnaire, which you should give to your clients before they even come to your office, because the research has shown that the clients are more likely to be candid when they're filling this out at home as compared to coming into your office and you asking this face-to-face, will help us to look at survivors and not say to them, what's wrong with you, but instead to say, what has happened to you? This is the most recent recommendation now from individuals who have not only made the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, but are really focusing on it. And if you have children who have come from desperate circumstances, who've been in foster care, who've run away from home, who've had lots of other problems, you might consider the expanded Adverse Childhood Experiences questionnaire, which includes 5 more experiences, which would include having witnessed violence, having lived in an unsafe neighborhood, having been victims of racism, having been victims of foster care, or having been living in foster care, and or having been victims of bullying. These are all relevant dynamics with respect to this. We can't talk about this whole topic without making sure that we're recognizing the risk of COVID. Just in August of this year, New Jersey has noticed that there have been a significant number of children who are being exploited. And as this article says, 21 people were busted in a pedophile roundup, and the opportunities for predators to contact children directly have dramatically increased with remote home learning amid the coronavirus pandemic. So this, I know, is happening in every country where children are not able to go to school, and where the most common reporters of child maltreatment are teachers. And so therefore they are no longer right there as they would have been. So let me just summarize by saying thank you so much for your attention, and I hope that this information regarding information and communication technology grooming will keep us alert and help us to be really focused on how to do the right things for our clients and patients, and to keep our minds open. Here is my contact information. There is an underscore between Sharon and Cooper, so in case it looks like it's just a space, no, there's an underscore for my email address, and I'm happy to entertain any questions or comments. Thank you so much.